The 12th thing he did was the one that finally shattered every chain holding me inside that house forever. He told me he was sorry one evening, after 4 months of systematic spiritual suffocation had nearly finished me. He came in from the fields with mud on his boots and washed his hands slow at the basin. He sat across from me at supper and said, "Mary, I have been too hard on you. Forgive me." He said he loved me and that we would walk through this darkness together as husband and wife should. For one trembling moment in that kitchen, I let myself believe the war against my soul was finally over. I cried and reached across the table and held his rough hand and felt something like hope return to me. That was the cruelest thing he ever did, because it was designed from the first word to be a trap. 2 days after that apology, I found a letter on his desk in the barn office, addressed to Bishop Troyer. It detailed every single word I had spoken in the soft hours after I believed myself safe and loved again. Every doubt I had whispered in the dark beside him was written there in his careful, slanted hand. Every tender confession I offered, thinking the worst had passed, became evidence gathered against my fleeing soul. He had apologized the way a hunter sets a snare, using the exact shape of what the animal needs most. The gentleness was strategy, and the tears he let me cry were just the harvest he was waiting to collect. I stood in that cold barn in Holmes County, reading my own words turned into weapons against me forever. That was the moment I finally understood that Jonas Yoder had never once seen me as a person worth saving. He saw me as a problem requiring management, and the 12 tools he used were simply the instruments his faith provided. I left 6 weeks after finding that letter, and I will not tell you the road I walked to get out. There are women still inside those communities right now who travel the same hidden paths I used that night. I carried the clothes on my back and a small bag holding my children's things, and one address written small. That address was folded into the toe of a borrowed sneaker given to me by a hand I will not name here. The shunning came down on me like winter falling all at once within a single month of my departure from everything. My parents sent back every letter I wrote them unopened, with my own handwriting staring back at me accusingly. My sisters did not come to the door when I stood outside their houses, calling their names into the silence. My children were forbidden from speaking to me for almost a full year while I fought through courts to reach them. Samuel remarried within 2 years, and the community treated him like a widower, mourning a wife lost to worldly corruption. They called him faithful, and they called me fallen, and they never once asked what he had done to me. In their eyes, a husband who hides shoes and steals buggy keys and empties bank accounts is simply leading well. A husband who sends your sister to watch you and burns your mail is simply loving you the way God commands. A husband who uses your own children as leverage against your freedom is doing the sacred work of the church. That is what the Ordnung teaches, and that is what every man in Holmes County learns before he ever takes a wife. The system does not need to be cruel, because it has already made cruelty look exactly like devotion and faithfulness and love. In therapy 18 months later, I learned a word that changed everything I understood about those 4 months of siege. My therapist said it carefully, the way you explain oxygen to someone who has been drowning so long they forgot air exists. She said, "Mary, what happened to you has a name in the outside world, and that name is coercive control." She told me it is recognized and studied, and that in some places what Jonas did would be against the law entirely. I sat in her small office on a Tuesday afternoon, and I cried for 1 solid hour without stopping or speaking. Not because of what he did to me, but because for 33 years, nobody in my world had given me language. The Amish world does not call it abuse when a husband takes every pair of shoes his wife owns from the closet. It calls that leadership, and it calls the silence that follows a woman learning her proper place beneath God and man. It does not call it abuse when your sister sleeps in your spare room and follows you into the garden reporting everything. It calls that love, and it calls the watching a faithful family doing the sacred work of bringing a lost soul home. It does not call it abuse when the bishop and deacons and their wives stand in a half circle praying over you. It does not call it abuse when your father refuses to meet your eyes across his own kitchen table anymore. It calls all of that the church working as God designed it to work for the salvation of the wayward and broken. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds to someone who has never lived inside these fences. There are good Amish men in Holmes County, and I grew up surrounded by many of them in my own family. My own father, in his quiet, distant way, was not a cruel man, though his silence taught me that silence was love. But the system itself hands every single one of those 12 tools to any man the moment his wife says she wants freedom. Whether he picks them up is his choice, but most do, because they have been taught that using them is faithfulness. They believe refusing to cage you means failing your eternal soul and letting the devil carry you away into darkness forever. If you grew up in a place where the people who claimed to love you most were the same ones willing to harm you, if you ever sat at a kitchen table while everyone you loved explained calmly that your freedom was the devil's own work, if you have been on either side of something like what I have described here today, I see you clearly and completely. You were not crazy, and you were not ungrateful, and you were not weak or broken or lost to the world. You were a person trying to become a person inside a system designed to keep you from ever discovering that truth. Tell me in the comments which of the 12 things hit you hardest when you heard me describe what Jonas did. Tell me if you have stood on either side of a kitchen table like that one where I sat alone facing everyone. If you want to keep hearing the truths that come from behind the prayer covering that our communities spent generations silencing, subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl, because there are so many more stories waiting in the quiet behind those closed doors. I am only beginning to tell them, and each one costs something real, but each one also sets something free inside me. Mary Yoder is my name, and Holmes County, Ohio is where this story lives and breathes and still haunts me today. These stories belong to every woman who was ever told that obedience and love were the same thing, spoken differently. Until next time, remember that the people who truly love you should never need to build a cage to keep you close. If they do, it was never love, no matter how gently they spoke or how many scriptures they quoted over your bowed head. It was only ever control, dressed in the clothing of faith, wearing the face of someone you trusted with your whole life. The shoes were just the beginning, and the apology was just another lock on a door they never wanted me to find. But I found it, and I walked through it barefoot in November, with nothing but an address and my own two shaking hands. Some doors, once you walk through them, can never be closed behind you again, no matter how many bishops try. I am standing on the other side now, and I am telling you what I see from here, with my own voice. The air is different out here, and it fills your lungs in a way that nothing inside those walls ever could or would. And every woman still sitting at that kitchen table alone deserves to know that this side exists and is waiting for her. And that door leads somewhere nobody inside those walls ever told me existed or described in any language I knew. The my dung descended on my life the way a blade falls through something soft and living, without any hesitation or mercy. Every baptized soul in Holmes County received the word about Mary Yoder within 30 days of my walking away from everything. My mother, who had nursed me through fevers and braided my hair each morning, became a stranger, passing me without recognition. My father, whose quiet love I had spent 33 years translating from silence into something warm, erased me completely. The practice requires totality, and totality is exactly what they delivered to me with precision that felt almost rehearsed. No shared bread, no shared table, no shared words beyond the barest functional necessities required by unavoidable proximity in small communities. I became a ghost haunting the edges of my own history, while everyone I loved pretended I had simply ceased to exist. The children were the wound that never stopped bleeding, no matter how many months passed or how many legal papers I filed. For almost 12 months, my own sons and daughters were instructed that speaking to their mother constituted disobedience against God Himself. Samuel taught them, or allowed them to be taught, that another woman would fill the space I left behind in their lives. I fought through English courts with borrowed money and a borrowed voice, trying to reach 4 small hearts across an impossible distance. The system that had caged me inside that marriage now caged me outside it with equal effectiveness and far greater cruelty somehow. Every night for a year, I lay in a rented room in a town where nobody knew my name and whispered their names. Slowly, through persistence and legal intervention, and perhaps some small remaining mercy, things began shifting back towards something bearable. I cannot call it justice, because justice would mean none of this ever happened to any mother, anywhere, for wanting freedom. Samuel found another wife within 24 months, and the community wrapped around him like he was the wounded party in everything. They called him faithful, and they called him brave, and they called him a man who had endured his wife being stolen by darkness. Nobody asked what 12 things he had done to a woman in her own home over 4 months of calculated spiritual siege. Nobody questioned whether hiding shoes and burning letters and emptying accounts and weaponizing children constituted something worth examining closely. In their theology, he had simply exercised the authority God granted every husband over every wife since the beginning of creation itself. The Ordnung provided him every tool, and the community applauded him for using each one with dedication and thoroughness and love. I was the cautionary tale mothers whispered to daughters, and he was the faithful servant who had tried his best against impossible odds. That is how the story reads inside those fences, and that is the only version anyone there will ever know or accept. 18 months after leaving, I sat in a small office with a woman who had spent her career studying the architecture of captivity. She explained coercive control to me, slowly and carefully, the way you would describe color to someone born in permanent darkness. She said, "Mary, what your husband did follows a pattern that researchers have documented and named and studied across many different contexts." She said in some countries, what happened inside your kitchen would be prosecuted as criminal behavior with real legal consequences attached. I remember the exact moment those words landed inside my chest, because something enormous shifted and rearranged itself permanently within me. For 33 years, I had lived without language for the thing that shaped every boundary of my existence as a woman. The absence of words had been its own kind of prison, operating invisibly alongside every other cage they built around my daily life. Having language did not undo the damage, but it gave me ground to stand on that nobody could ever pull away again. The Amish world has different names for everything I experienced, and every one of those names sounds gentle and warm and necessary. When a husband removes every shoe his wife owns from the closet, they call that a man providing firm spiritual leadership in crisis. When your sister sleeps in your spare room and follows your movements and reports to your husband nightly, they call that love. When the bishop stands over your chair with 2 ministers praying loudly about devils and submission, they call that the church functioning. When your father turns his face from you across his own table, they call that a righteous man protecting his household from corruption. When your children learn to call another woman by the name that belongs to you alone, they call that healing and moving forward. Every act of control wears a Sunday dress and carries a Bible and speaks in the softest, most concerned voice you have ever heard. That is what makes it so effective, and that is what makes it so difficult to name from inside, where the vocabulary simply does not exist. I need to say something important here, because I refuse to paint every soul inside those communities with the same broad brush. Good men exist in Holmes County, and I knew many of them growing up, and some of them would never touch these tools. My father caused harm through silence and distance, but he was not calculating cruelty the way Samuel calculated every move against me. There are Amish marriages built on genuine tenderness, where husbands would sooner cut off their own hands than cage their wives. I believe that completely, and I say it here because truth requires the full picture, not just the parts that serve my pain. But the structure itself, the theology, the Ordnung, the unwritten expectations, they hand every man a loaded weapon on his wedding day. Whether he fires it depends on his character, but the weapon exists in his hands regardless, and the community will support him if he does. That is the problem I am naming here today, and it is bigger than any single man or any single marriage or any single woman. If you grew up inside a system where love and control shared the same face and spoke with the same gentle voice, I see you. If you ever sat alone on one side of a table while everyone you trusted explained calmly why your freedom was spiritual death. If you learned to swallow words so completely that you forgot you had ever known how to speak them at all in any voice. If someone you loved used your own children as currency to purchase your obedience and called that faithfulness to God and family and tradition. If the kindest people you knew were also the ones most willing to participate in your slow, careful disappearance from your own life. You were not broken, and you were not ungrateful, and you were not crazy, and you were not weak or faithless or lost. You were a whole person, trapped inside a system that required your smallness in order to keep functioning as designed every single day. I see you and I believe you, and I am telling you from this side of that door that the air out here is real. Tell me which of the 12 things landed hardest inside your chest when you heard me name them one by one in order. Tell me if you recognized any of it from your own kitchen table, or your own closet, or your own cold barn on a November morning. If these words found you at the right moment, then subscribe to this channel, because I am only beginning to speak what was forbidden. There are stories stacked inside me like cordwood waiting for winter, and each one I release makes room for something new to grow. Every woman still sitting alone at that table, with everyone she loves arranged against her, deserves to know this side exists. Mary Yoder is my name, and Holmes County, Ohio is where these 12 things happened to me in the space of 4 months. I am not whispering anymore, and I am not apologizing for the volume of my own voice, telling its own truth, finally and completely. These stories belong to every woman who was taught that cages built from scripture and tradition and family love are somehow not cages at all. The people who genuinely love you will never require your captivity as proof that their love is working correctly inside your life. If keeping you close requires locked buggy doors and hidden shoes and burned letters, then what they feel is ownership, not love. I walked out barefoot in November, with nothing but an address folded small and my own 2 hands shaking against the cold, dark air. Some women are still walking that same path tonight, and I will not say anything here that closes any door behind me or ahead of them. But I will say this from the other side, where my lungs fill completely for the first time in 33 years of breathing. Freedom is not the devil's work, no matter how many bishops say it over your bowed head in soft, concerned voices every Sunday. Freedom is just becoming the person you were before they spent your whole life teaching you to disappear into someone else's story. And you deserve to find her waiting for you on the other side of every door they ever told you not to open.